Check that you have all of your patterns: front top, front waistband, back top, back waistband, collar, sleeve, front flap, pocket facing, pocket bag, front skirt, back skirt. Sew up the darts on the back skirt. Sew the front top and back top together along the shoulder with a 1 cm seam allowance. Fold the collar into half and sew with a 1 cm seam allowance. Turn the collar inside out and iron well. Mark out all of the notches on the front and back top. Mark out all the notches on the collar. Match up the notches on the collar and the neckline and pin them together to secure. On the front top, mark out the notch of the fold line. Fold along the line. Check that the collar notches are matched up. Readjust the pin so that the collar is sandwiched in between. Next, match up the shoulder notches. Readjust the pin. Repeat for the other side. Sew along the neckline, stopping exactly at the shoulder seam with a 1 cm seam allowance. Grab a pair of scissors and snip into the seam allowances to reduce tension. Make sure to cut exactly at the shoulder seam on both sides. Then turn it inside out. To sew up the gap, first sew the last 2 layers together with a 1 cm seam allowance. Sew from shoulder to shoulder. Grab a pair of scissors and snip into the seam allowances to reduce tension. Push up the seam allowances and iron well. Flip down the top layer of the collar and fold in the open edge. Fold it so that it covers the stitches below. Tuck in all the seam allowances to keep it neat. Then iron well. Flip to the right side and sew in the ditch from shoulder to shoulder. Sew 2 rows of gathering stitch on the back top. Mark out the center back. Gently gather the back top so that the width matches the waistband. Sew the top to the outer waistband panel with a 1 cm seam allowance. Mark out the fold line on the waistband. Fold it in and iron well. Sew 2 rows of gathering stitch on the front top. Gently use the gathering stitch to reduce the width so that it matches the waistband. Focus most of the gathers towards the center. Sew the top and waistband together with a 1 cm seam allowance. Mark out the notches on the sleeve and then crimp between the sleeve crown. Sew the sleeve to the armhole, making sure to match up the notches. Attach them together with a 1 cm seam allowance. Mark out the notches on the pocket facing, with both panels right side up. Match up the notches on the pocket facing with the pocket bag. Then sew along the curve 1 cm from the edge. Sew the pocket bag to the front skirt with a 1 cm seam allowance. Grab a pair of scissors and snip into the seam allowances to reduce tension. push away the pocket bag. And understitch on the pocket bag, making sure to catch onto the seam allowances below. Fold over the pocket bag and iron well. Fold the pocket bag in 2 halves and iron well. Check the alignment that the curve is 1 cm away from the notch. Baste along the top to secure all the fabric layers. Overlock the bottom of the pocket bag together. Baste along the side seam to secure all the fabric layers. Sew the front waistband to the front skirt with a 1 cm seam allowance. Sew the back waistband to the skirt with a 1 cm seam allowance. Grab the inner waistband, the one with interfacing, and attach to the outer waistband with a 1 cm seam allowance. So the top will be sandwiched in between both waistbands. Push up the seam allowances and iron well. Then flip to the right side and sew in the ditch, making sure to catch on the waistband below. Moving on to the front, sew the inner waistband to the outer waistband with a 1 cm seam allowance. Once again, the front top will be sandwiched in between both waistbands. Push away the front top, then flip down the waistband and sew along the fold line. Turn it inside out and check if any corrections are necessary. There should be no fold or pinching of the cloth where the top meets the waistband. Turn it back inside out and snip into the seam allowances to reduce the bulk. Push up the seam allowances and iron well. Flip to the right side and sew in the ditch, making sure to catch onto the waistband below. Sew the front and back panels together along the side seam with a 1 cm seam allowance. Repeat for the other side. To complete the sleeves, fold in the sleeve hem by 4 cm and iron well. Then top stitch 3 cm from the folded edge. Fold the skirt panel according to the fold line and iron well. Flip open the folded edge and mark 5 cm from the hem. Fold up the hem and sew along the crease. Turn it inside out. Following the marking, continue to fold up the hem and iron well. Top stitch 4 cm from the folded edge. On both sides, top stitch 2.5 cm from the folded edge. Using your desired belt as a reference, measure the required size for each belt loop. Make sure that the loop is not too small and not too big. Use the calculations in the notes and cut the fabric on a bias. Fold the fabric into half and sew 1 cm from the folded edge. Snip away the excess seam allowances. Use a loop turner or any other tool to turn it inside out. Cut exactly into 4 pieces. Mark out your desired belt loop positions. I would recommend 2 for the back and 2 for the front. For the front, I place it a little off-center closer to the seam allowance. Next, mark the halfway point of the waistband. Using your belt as a reference, mark out the width of the belt. Sew each belt loop into place. Before sewing the last stitch, use your belt to double check that the size is right. Fold the front flap into half and sew down with a 1 cm seam allowance. Turn it inside out and iron well. Overlock the open edges together. On the wearer's right, mark out 2.5 cm from the folded edge. Align the overlocked edge of the flap along the marking. Then sew down with a 1 cm seam allowance. Flip open the front flap and top stitch close to the seam. The final step, sew your buttons, buttonholes and snap buttons. I would recommend 2 snap buttons, one at the top and one at the bottom. And there you have it! Your dress is completed.